with you in order. So I'm going to give the floor to Paul Chatterton for his 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Jenny. It's wonderful to have 5 minutes with you. I've got about 5 days worth of things I want to talk to you about. I've got 15 minutes of Leeds Climate Jury. So listen, it's wonderful to see these processes rolling around different cities and towns, right? It's so important. And this links to my first point that what we're doing here, what you're doing here is one of the solutions in itself, right? That you're embarking upon a longer process of trying to figure something out, which will mean you'll start to see the topic in a really different way. And that at heart is the communication challenge, that we're in a context where we don't have enough time to figure stuff out. And my own context, so I work at the University of Leeds. My day job, I'm a professor of geography, right? So I teach, I teach university, but I do a lot of public speaking. There's not a chat function, is there? I was going to put a few links in, but I'll send the links you can send around anyway. I've written a few books recently to have a look at with some web guys and stuff. But there's I've made some notes on my iPad here. So cooperation and communication. I'm a cooperator at heart. I live in a housing cooperative called Lilac Grove. We built 20 straw bale houses the other year, and we live in them. But being a cooperator and understanding communication is so important to this. And one of the key things we're up against, as I mentioned, is this lack of ability to spend time to figure out this big challenge of climate change, what we're also calling the climate emergency. And there's a big problem because there's a gap between the challenge, right, and action. So, and we have politics in the middle, right, which is councillors, officers, all that kind of stuff, local business. So we've got the challenge led by the global scientists saying, look, if we don't, you'll have had some of this science in previous sessions, if we don't change course within 10 or 12 years, we're not going to meet these Paris targets to hold global temperatures to 1.5 degrees, right? So we've kind of got a sense of the challenge. There's a lot of misinformation around it, right? But we can go into that separately. But the point is there's a gap between the challenge and action. So local authority councillors and officers have to do stuff, right? But it's almost impossible for them to get their heads around what they have to do on their local patch to meet this challenge. And that's where you, people like the jury, come in to offer them some insights about the scale of the challenge and what would naturally progress from there. We'll hear from other commentators specifically about things like housing and energy and transport, which is so important because we're not looking at tinkering anymore, right? So the communication challenge is around what we call tell the truth, syncing the challenges, the great challenges of our age, with quite ambitious action on the ground, because we still can do ambitious action on the ground. Look what we've just done over the last 4 months. We've entirely turned our society on its head, global society. So we know we can take drastic action if we want. So something like climate change will need some kind of COVID style response, yeah? We need a whole city, a whole team city or town team approach, right, to the communication challenge. We need every sector in the town or a locality. There's 4. So there's the university sector, or the research sector, call it. There's business, there's the public sector, and then there's kind of people that we'll call the civic sector. All those 4 groups together have got to come to an understanding of what the challenge is and own the big picture of what their town or locality has got to do about this challenge. And that's a really big deal because typically these sectors are going in different directions, right, with different priorities. So the business sector will say we've got to do X, Y, and Z. The research sector is not, we're busy researching. The public, the public sector says we've got to just run the town, we've got to get re-elected. But there's got to be a different kind of local politics, and that's what you've got to kind of engage your councillors and officers in, is a new kind of politics. Because here's the thing, because climate change is such a complex problem, we call it a wicked problem, right? You can't figure it out. You can't poke it. You can't lift the bonnet up and see it, right? It's got loads of different aspects to it. Its origins are complex and how you deal with it is complex. Therefore, not one single institution can figure out the solution. Therefore, it's all hands on deck. And that's what we need a new story of our towns and cities for. Everyone's got to get on board with the challenges and the scale of the change in front of those challenges. We almost need what I call...
Paul, I
yeah.
feel really bad butting in here, but can I give you, you've given a really good idea about what people can talk to you more about. Can I just give you 30 more seconds just to round off this initial pitch? Is that okay?
You won't believe me, but I was on my last point.
Oh, brilliant. I should have let you go.
Yeah. We need what I call breakaway people who are sat there at work saying, do you know what? I can't do this anymore. It doesn't make sense. And that will start for people to shift off kind of what they've been doing up to now and say, look, and take it to their boss, take it to their workplaces, take it to their homes and say, I want to do things differently. Okay, so I'll leave it there. Loads to pick up on, especially I can pick up on transport and housing because I know lots about that. Right, I'm going to mute myself. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks ever so much, Paul. So hopefully that's given you a good idea about the sort of things that you can speak to Paul about if you'd like to be in his group. And his group is going to be Group A. So I'm going to move on to Andy now. Andy, your 5 minutes starts now. If you could, that's great.
Okay. Hello, everybody. This is a privilege to be invited to come and talk to you. Thank you for this. I was also a commentator, in fact, for the Leeds, what they call the citizens' jury. There, people's jury. It's the same thing, different name. I just want to make one observation about that process. I was incredibly encouraged by the effort that was put in by the people on the jury. And when the recommendations came, the heartfelt beliefs that each of them had formulated by talking to each other and by getting some more information. And in fact, all 25 of them came out completely convinced that the climate emergency was the biggest problem that we have to solve as a society. And they'd spent 30 hours getting there. I felt that that means that every citizen of Leeds is only 30 hours away from being a committed climate activist. And I was really taken by that thought. So what can councils do? Councils have got a real challenge because they've got no money. The COVID challenge has given them even less money. Leeds is almost broke. They've published now that they're nearly bankrupt. 80% of the money that they have goes into adult social care. I'm part of several activist groups that are working on housing and what can be done about it. It's a huge challenge. As my friend Paul says, it's a wicked problem. There are so many complexities to it. But here's the thing, here's the thought that I'm going to give you. Every house can be made warm and comfy with low bills. Every house. Some houses are harder. Yeah, okay, I'll give you that. But the key thing that I reckon is important is that we can do this at a community level. And by engaging people, by training people, by bringing people from the communities together to do this kind of work, we can bypass the big, horrible corporate companies with their fat cat salaries and their bonuses and their shareholders. So local people working on local homes, creating local jobs. What's happening? It's really slow. It's incredibly frustrating. I've been doing this for more than 10 years and they're still just talking about it. There's a big initiative called Accelerator Cities running at the moment across the country. Leeds is one of those, but even so, they're still working on what they're calling a playbook. They're playing at it, in fact, of how to engage people, how to do this stuff. A key issue is finance. Now, for me, it's crucial that this should be a national infrastructure program as a key part of decarbonising Britain, but that's not going to come anytime soon. So for me, we've got to start looking at community investment bonds. That is being looked at. I'll tell you something that I said to the Leeds people, and this may well be true for the big pension funds in and around Lancaster. The West Yorkshire Pension Fund, I looked the numbers up, the published numbers, and they've got £900 million invested in fossil fuel companies. And in fact, another £150 million invested in tobacco. Now, what's the pension fund? So that's £1 billion. Imagine if you could persuade them to divest that £1 billion and create a green fund and invest it in local projects. Now, I don't know what the equivalent numbers are for whatever the pension fund that the Lancaster and region councillors enjoy, but I can't help but believe there's some dodgy investments still hanging around. So that's one way of doing it. The other key thing is we've got to be ambitious. I'm very disappointed. I do some work with York City Council, Ilkley Town Council, and also Leeds City Council, and they're only aiming at a very poor target for improving thermal performance. I think we've got to be ever so ambitious to really get down to net zero by any date. Now, the huge benefits of that, the key benefit is health and well-being. By removing damp homes, cold homes, drafty homes, not only do we tackle fuel poverty, but we're actually taking a huge burden off the NHS. So there's a thing called social return on investment, which is a real good argument for putting money into investing in our homes.
Andy, I've got to give you a 30-second warning, if that's all right.
Well, okay, my presentation time, I said I've just had 5 minutes, so I was using my last word to say the last second, but I'll take another 30 seconds. Thank you.
Oh, go on.
No, if you want to move on, that's fine. I'm really happy to expand on all of this stuff.
Okay, great. And you've had a lot of experience of working with people at community level, actually doing their own retrofitting as well, haven't you, Andy, I think?
Yes, I have. I've been running a social enterprise for years and years, and one of the things that I really enjoy doing is working with groups of people and showing them how to insulate their homes. And we come together and work on a specific project on a specific house, and then that group of people can go around each other's house replicating that project, and all they're doing at this point is spending money on materials. And because we have a great day talking about sustainability, we bring food to share, I call these events housewarming parties.
Oh, brilliant.
Thank you.
You can see there, Andy's got a whole lot of experience in that housing sort of area, for those of you that are interested in that, and he's going to be Group B.
I have been following this quite, I find it quite interesting, and I've studied some of the stuff, some of the paperwork that you have seen from the start. And farming obviously takes up, food and farming takes up what is alleged is 25% of the carbon output. And I can see people's frustration, and, you know, just listening to Paul before about the problems and the frustrations that people feel. And actually farming has quite a lot of the answers. It's just that people aren't prepared to really engage at this moment in time. I'm hoping that this will, you know, what you're doing here is actually a stepping stone towards that. Like I say, we have a lot of the answers. I think where you are going at this moment in time is leading you down the wrong path. I think the answers are actually very simple, quite easy to implement, and quite the results would actually be quite quick. But it's about taking a step back and looking, perhaps doing away with preconceptions that have been put down before, if that makes sense. And, you know, like I say, you know, you have to reverse engineer where you want to be. Lancaster eats, on my basic maths, 400 tons of food a day. A farmer's market cannot provide that. Providing food for this nation is an industrial army operation of biblical proportions every day. But, you know, you are hitting on the right topics with education and everything else all the way through. It's just about bringing them all together, I think. I don't know how long I've got left. I didn't practice that.
No, go on. You've got another at least 3 minutes, Ian.
Oh, wow. Christ. Right. excuse my profanity. Yeah, like I say, you know, you're trying to implement 400 tons of food, but farmers are already, we're carbon footprinting, we're putting standards in place. It's becoming a big thing. It's just that people aren't prepared to pay for it, and they don't have to pay for it. All they have to do is put things in place where these extras are actually recognised. And by recognised, again, it's just a case of, you don't even have to think about it. It's what is on your supermarket shelf as you walk down the aisle, is that, has it been carbon marketed? Has it been carbon footprinted? are the people behind it actually doing all their best to reduce the carbon, which they are. And again, the technology is there, but there's a thing where the technology isn't being used because people aren't prepared to recognize it and then prepared to not pay for it, but to have some market loyalty towards it. And, you know, like I say, it's quite, Lancaster City Council has all the powers to implement it as it is now, and could actually have quite a success story on its hands, I think.
Brilliant, thanks Ian. So yeah, Ian's got those interesting thoughts about the current sort of production systems and supply chains and food labelling type things that could be put in place quite soon. And also, he also has had some discussions, and as I said earlier, has got a relationship with the, I don't know what LESS stands for, but it's the Lancaster Sustainable Food Group that we heard from earlier on in the process, and they grow veg on some of the land at Ian's farm, so he can talk about that as well. So hopefully that gives you a snapshot of what you can talk to Ian about in a small group, and Ian will be in Group C. Thanks ever so much, Ian. So now we're going to come on to Paul Holdsworth on transport. I'm just looking at my screen to see where I can see Paul. There we are. Thank you for waving, Paul. I'll hand over to you for your 5 minutes. Thanks, Paul.
Lovely, thanks very much. So my name's Paul Holdsworth. I live up in Kendal. I'm a skipper on the boats on Windermere. So I've just come in from an amazingly busy day on the lake, come up and travel on our boat sometime. But I'm also a local transport campaigner. I've campaigned on particularly making places more walkable for, I don't know, about 20 years off and on, and I've done various things. Two things I'd like to talk to you quickly about. One is 20 is plenty for Kendal. Now, I know Lancashire has done a lot of work on mandatory wide area 20 limits. Cumbria's done very little indeed. And about 5 years ago, our town council were worried about car congestion in town. And knowing my background, one of the councillors got in touch with me and said, Paul, what do you think? How do we deal with congestion in town? And really off the top of my head, it was the obvious thing to me was 20-mile-an-hour limits. We can make, at a stroke, we can make the town more cycling friendly, but particularly more walking friendly. And I thought it would just disappear into the council machine. And all credit to our town council, they picked it up and they ran with it. And for 5 years now, we've been plugging away at this. And actually the county council really not shown any interest at all, one way or the other, but the town council have persevered. They've got consultants in and they're drawing up plans of how Kendal might become a 20-mile-an-hour town. And crucially, we've pushed them to say how it might be done to make just the residential areas 20 mile an hour, but keep all the main roads 30, but also to do the whole town main roads as well. Because one of the key problems is there tends to be a default response. Oh, main roads are too important, they've got to stay at 30, even though it doesn't make much difference to overall journey times. But of course, main roads are where most of the things that generate trips are. They're where schools are very often, where shops, where workplaces, where the places we go to have fun are. And people live on main roads. In Kendal, our main roads are all residential streets too. So we're really keen to say, let's look at the main roads, making them 20 miles an hour, make the whole town 20 miles an hour. Be lots cheaper, be much more easy to understand, much easier to enforce. And it's taken us a long time, but I seriously believe we're getting there. So I'd love to talk to you a bit more about how we've gone about that, some of the challenges we've had, but some of the successes too. The other thing is my background. Before I was a skipper on the boats on Windermere, I used to work for a national charity called Living Streets. They're a utility walking charity. They've been around since the 1930s. And specifically, I used to work with local people, identifying how their neighbourhood could be made more walking friendly. Now, if you get professional transport consultants in to do that, if your council did that, what they tend to do is call in people from the local area, sit them in a council meeting room with charts and maps and PowerPoints, and do it all remotely. And what we used to do at Living Streets is say, forget all that, let's go out on the street and walk around it with local people, because you know your streets better than anyone. You know them better than me. You certainly know them better than your local transport engineers. You know every detailed problem of regular walks you do. You know the paving slabs that rock and squirt dirty water up the back of your legs. You know where the dog mess always appears, the same places all the time. You know all those tiny details that have a big impact on the quality of your walking experience, that either tell you you're valued as someone who walks, or actually we don't really care about you. And if you want to, I'm really delighted to see you talking about how do we make Lancaster more walking friendly. One of the key things you've got to focus on is rewarding people for making the right choice. If I walk around Kendal at the moment in the pouring rain in November at rush hour, I press a button and wait for the traffic to stop for me, and I stand and wait while I get wetter and wetter as people drive past at 3 miles an hour in a warm, comfortable car with their choice of radio on, cup of coffee in hand, all very comfortable. And I'm told, you don't count as a pedestrian. We really don't care about you. And the biggest disincentive to walking, I believe, is constantly being reminded that you've made the wrong choice. One of the most shocking things that Kendal did very recently was made the crossing point outside Kendal College much worse for people crossing the road. Now, I'm in my 60s now. A lot of my choices are hardwired into me. It's very hard to change things as you get older. I'm sure those of you who are maybe a bit around my age would agree with that. But for college students who are just starting out in life, to be confronted by a crossing outside their college that suddenly becomes much harder. There's a sheep pen in the middle where they have to stop in the middle of busy, noisy, smelly traffic, press another button. So a single stage crossing became 2-stage, guard railing everywhere, which is just pedestrian fencing, stopping them going where they want to go. It was a big message to those college students that actually you don't really matter. We're much more concerned about keeping this traffic flowing a wee bit faster. And I think it's really important that if you're going to encourage walking in town, there are loads and loads of things you can do. And if you use the sort of tools that Living Streets uses, you can blizzard your council with suggestions. They won't be able to say no to all of them. They will say no to some of them, you can be sure, but you will then force their hand and they will absolutely have to take some positive steps in the right direction.